In the shadow-draped world of crimson dawn, ancient powers awaken and the fate of the outpost hangs in the balance. As the mysterious winter reveals his true intentions, a primal alpha calls the Lycan pack to a destiny they cannot escape. Elder and Serana will in dark necromancy unleash a new legion of undead warriors. With alliances tested and loyalties torn, the outpost must face the ultimate enemy in a battle that could forever alter the fabric of their world. Who will emerge victorious in this clash of ancient curses and modern survival? Dive into the thrilling continuation where every heart-pounding moment promises to keep you on the edge of your seat. Are you ready for the hunt? Chapter 1. The Enigmatic Winter. Under the grey sky, the figure in the chrome mask introduced himself, with a voice as cold as his namesake. "I am Winter," he said, his tone flat and unyielding. Marco, Nina, and Rachel stood before him, uncertain yet desperate for any lead that could help their cause. "You are searching for something?" Winter inquired, his head tilting slightly, reflecting the sparse light of his mask. "Yes, we are looking for a camp where vampires protect humans and possess some type of weapon to stop the undead," Marco replied, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and weariness. Winter studied the trio, his gaze obscured by the reflective mask. "Maybe I could help you, but I want something in return," he proposed, his voice betraying no emotion. "If we can help you, we'd be glad to," Nina responded quickly, her eyes darting between Winter and her companions, trying to gauge his intentions. "I seek Lycan, werewolves. If you have seen any and know their location, I may help you," Winter stated plainly. Marco exchanged a hesitant look with Nina, questioning whether they should divulge information about their allies to this mysterious stranger. After a moment of contemplative silence, Marco weighed his answer carefully. "Back at our camp, there are 10 Lycan. They aid our camp, but the undead there are too many and vampires control them," he revealed, his voice a mix of resignation and strategic calculation. "Indeed," Winter murmured, seemingly pleased with the information. "The camp you seek is miles from here. On foot, it will take months to get there, if you even make it. These lands are treacherous and fraught with danger." "Then we'd better make a start," Marco said determinedly, his resolve hardening. Marco turned to Winter, curiosity piqued. "Did you hear of a weapon? One that can stop the undead for miles?" Winter looked at Marco, and an awkward silence hung between them. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally spoke. "Yes, such a weapon does exist, but it is not in that camp." "You have seen such a weapon? Where could we find it?" Nina interjected, her interest piqued. "That weapon will be of no use to you. Forget about it. Return to your camp, aid them. The weapon you seek cannot be found," Winter concluded cryptically, turning his back on them and concluding the conversation and their brief alliance. With few options left, the trio turned and headed in the direction Winter had indicated for the camp. As they walked away, each was lost in thought, pondering Winter's mysterious warnings and the arduous journey ahead. The path was uncertain, and Winter's words echoed ominously in their minds, but the need to find safety and strength drove them forward into the unknown. In the hushed calm of a secluded wooded area, Winter approached a small cave concealed within the rocks. Before entering, he issued a slight whistle, a pre-arranged signal known only to those within. From the depths of the cave, a deep, guttural growl emanated, stirring the quiet forest air. Unperturbed, Winter stepped into the shadowy entrance. "Good news, my friend," Winter announced as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. "We have found your kin, you shall be Alpha again." 2 primal red eyes glowed in response, reflecting a fierce and wild intelligence not often seen. Back at the outpost, the tension was palpable as the remaining Lycan and human defenders worked tirelessly to bolster their defenses against an imminent attack from the undead and the 2 elder vampires, Eldur and Serana. Lucan, though still injured and unable to fight, issued commands from a makeshift command center. Samantha, Captain Harris, and Commander Lewis coordinated the outpost defenses, reinforcing barricades and strategizing the best use of their limited resources. Meanwhile, at Fort Eldur and Serana delved deeper into the dark arts of necromancy. They had begun to master the creation of undead warriors, with enough intelligence to wield weapons as well as any soldier. These new warriors practiced their fighting skills under the watchful eyes of their creators, who observed with a mixture of pride and anticipation. "Soon, we will be strong enough to take that pathetic outpost," Eldur declared confidently to Serana as they watched their undead army train, "and put an end to those mongrel Lycan. They cannot stand against us. They are not true blood, and are but shadows of true Lycan," he added scornfully. Serana laughed, her voice echoing chillingly off the stone walls of Fort Eldur. She reveled in the thought of their upcoming victory, imagining the outpost falling before their enhanced forces. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across both the outpost and Fort Eldur, preparations continued on both sides. The defenders of the outpost checked their weapons and fortified their positions, knowing that the battle to come would be a test of everything they had built and believed in. Meanwhile, Eldur and Serana finalized their plans for the assault, confident in the power they had amassed and eager to demonstrate their dominance over what they viewed as lesser beings. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of all involved, with each side believing in their eventual triumph but haunted by the possible consequences of failure. In the dimly lit confines of Fort Eldur and Serana plotted with cold, cruel precision. "I want them to suffer before we kill them," Serana hissed, the memory of the Lycan's scratch still burning in her mind. "They will, my dear," Eldur reassured her with a wicked grin. "I want them to see how helpless their cause is, how hopeless the chances of survival. I want them to beg me for their lives." "Let's send a group of our best warriors to their camp, along with a few hundred undead. A small taste of what we can do," Eldur suggested, savoring the thought of their despair. "Yes, when they see what a small number can do, they will beg us to end it for them," laughed Serana. Following their sinister conversation, Eldur and Serana dispatched a small unit of their trained undead fighters to advance on the outpost, accompanied by around 300 regular undead. This force was but a fraction of what they controlled, yet formidable enough to test the outpost's defenses. Later that day, a guard at the outpost sounded the alarm. "Over there! A number of undead march this way!" he shouted. Instantly, the outpost sprang into action. The remaining wolf pack readied themselves, their senses heightened, while the guards with spears prepared to defend the walls. Captain Harris surveyed the advancing horde with a practiced eye. "There's not that many of them, but those undead in the front, are they marching in unison?" he questioned aloud, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Commander Lewis added, "They look organized." Lucan, still weak but strategically minded, confirmed, "Yes, similar to the ones we fought before. They were trained in combat and wielded weapons." "Unbelievable," muttered Captain Harris, realizing the threat was more serious than he had initially thought. As the undead reached the outpost, the battle erupted. The trained undead, though just a handful, demonstrated chilling efficiency. They moved with a lethal coordination that was unsettlingly human. The outpost defenders fought bravely, but the intensity and skill of the undead warriors took a toll. During the fierce skirmish, another Lycan was gravely wounded, and several camp defenders fell defending the walls. Captain Harris, observing the battle from a strategic vantage point, felt a cold shiver down his spine. Had there been more of them, I doubt we'd have survived, he admitted grimly, acknowledging the skill and ferocity of their foes. Just as the dust began to settle and the outpost caught its breath, another guard shouted from the lookout point, "More incoming!" Grabbing the binoculars, Captain Harris peered through them and saw a horrifying sight. Hundreds of the trained undead, far more than the first wave, marching systematically towards them. A sinking feeling overwhelmed everyone at the camp. The grim realization that they might not win against such overwhelming odds cast a shadow over the outpost. As fear and resolve mingled in the hearts of the outpost defenders, they prepared for what might be their last stand, knowing full well that the true test of their courage and unity was just beginning. The undead army halted in the distance, an eerie and silent tableau that seemed almost to mock the outpost with its sheer presence. From their vantage at Fort Eldur, Eldur and Sarana watched with dark amusement. Sarana, her eyes gleaming with malice, turned to Eldur. "Can I go?" she asked with a twisted smile. "Oh, okay then," Eldur replied, the corners of his mouth twitching upwards in anticipation. Moments later, emerging from the shadows at the front gate of the outpost, Sarana appeared, holding a white cloth aloft, a traditional symbol of truce, though her intentions were anything but peaceful. "Hello," she called out in a voice that echoed off the outpost walls. Captain Harris and Lucan appeared on the wall, faces set in grim lines. "I have a proposition," Sarana announced. Her tone was casual, as if discussing something trivial. "March everyone out here now. Eldur and I will make it quick for you all, and you will not have to face that over there," she said, gesturing nonchalantly to the massive army of undead looming in the distance. "It will be painless, but I cannot say the same for our warriors," she added, with a sinister smirk. As Captain Harris opened his mouth to respond, Sarana cut him off. "Oh, I don't expect an answer straight away. We'll give you 3 days, then I'll come back to feast or watch you suffer. Neither really matters to me," she declared coldly. With that, she disappeared into the shadows as swiftly as she had arrived. Reappearing by Eldur's side back at Fort Eldur, Sarana chuckled. "You should have seen their faces. They looked like death," she recounted gleefully. Both burst into laughter, their cruel joy echoing ominously around them. As the days passed, the looming threat of the undead army remained posed in the distance, a constant and harrowing reminder of the promised assault. The inhabitants of the outpost could see the undead, day and night, causing a pervasive fear of defeat that hung over the camp like a pall. Many were on the brink of giving up, overwhelmed by the prospect of such an overpowering force. Yet, Captain Harris and Commander Lewis refused to let morale falter completely. They gave motivating speeches, trying to rally the spirit of every man, woman, and Lycan within the outpost. They spoke of courage, of defiance, and the importance of standing together in the face of insurmountable odds. Even though deep down, every inhabitant knew the grim reality. They were likely facing an unwinnable battle. Their leaders' words spurred them on. In the quiet moments between speeches and planning, small acts of kindness and shared resolve wove the outpost community tighter together. They prepared as best they could, ready to fight, not just for survival, but for each other, holding on to hope even when it seemed there was none left. The final day arrived with a palpable tension that could be cut with a knife. Serana appeared once again at the gates of the outpost, her presence commanding and ominous. "What say you then?" she shouted across the divide. "Do I get to feed on your souls or not?" Captain Harris, standing atop the ramparts, shouted back with defiant resolve, borrowing a historic quote to fuel his challenge. "Come and take them!" The outpost readied for battle, the air thick with determination and fear. Serana smiled wickedly. "Oh, this will be good," she taunted as she vanished into the shadows. Moments later, the earth shook as the army of the undead began to march forward towards the outpost. The sound of their approach was deafening, the menacing clatter of weapons and the relentless footsteps creating a chorus of doom. As the undead army was halfway to the outpost, a white Honda Fit rolled up outside the camp, sputtering as it ran on the remaining fumes in its fuel tank. A man exited the vehicle, his identity obscured by a chrome mask. He shouted at the front of the gate, "You have Lycan here!" But his voice was nearly drowned out by the overwhelming noise of the marching undead. "Oh, how bothersome," Winter said with a hint of irritation. With a casual wave of his hand, the entire undead army stopped, rendered motionless as if frozen in time. The sudden silence was eerie. "That's better." I said, "Do you have Lycan here?" he repeated. Inside Fort Elder, Elder and Serana were stunned. They focused all their energy and power to regain control of the undead, but it was as if their connection had been severed. At the outpost gate, Captain Harris spoke up. "Who are you? Did you do that?" Yes. Do you have Lycan here?" Winter asked again, his tone impatient. Lucan stepped out from behind the gate, revealing his robust form. "Yes, I am one. We have 8 others, some wounded," he announced. "Excellent," Winter replied. "I'll need you to come with me, immediately." "We cannot leave. We stand with our friends here to fight side by side," Lucan declared, his voice resolute. Winter laughed, amused by the turn of events. "Forget this petty battle. Prepare to leave immediately," he insisted. "Also, I'll need some fuel for this car." "We will not abandon our friends," Lucan countered firmly. Winter turned to look at the motionless army of undead. "Okay. Who commands this army?" he asked, more to himself than anyone else. Captain Harris explained the situation, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "I have no wish to enter your fray on either side, but I need the help of the Lycans. Immediately," Winter stated pragmatically. "Give me some fuel, and I'll go speak with this vampire of yours," he commanded, indicating a temporary truce might be in their mutual interest. The outpost was left in a precarious balance, weighing the potential benefits of cooperating with this mysterious figure against the backdrop of an imminent undead assault, driven by the dark will of Elder and Serana. As Winter drove up to Fort Elder, a curious phenomenon unfolded before him. Any undead in his path froze in time, as if someone had simply switched them off. With an air of casual authority, he walked into the fort, undeterred by the eerie stillness that surrounded him. "Elders, I will speak with you," Winter announced, his voice carrying through the silent fort. Elder and Serana appeared from the shadows, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Ah, I have a predicament," Winter began, addressing them directly. "I need to take the Lycan away from here immediately, but it seems your assault on that outpost is keeping them there through some type of bond or sense of duty. You must stop your assault and leave them alone so they can come with me," he stated, his tone commanding. Elder bared his teeth in a snarl. I will end you right here, human, for speaking to your superior in such a manner, he threatened, his voice dripping with disdain. Winter sighed. Why is it always violence with your kind? Is it any wonder why Varric and his elders are dead? He retorted, his remark striking a nerve. Elder's eyes widened slightly. You knew Varric? He asked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Yes, he was as naive as you. Now stop attacking this outpost immediately, Winter demanded. Enraged, Elder shifted into his shadow form, ready to launch an attack. Always violence, Winter remarked calmly as he pulled an odd-looking device from his pocket. He flicked it on, and it radiated with infrared and ultraviolet light, stopping Elder in his tracks. Elder recoiled in agony as the light bathed him. A simple device, one that emits infrared and ultraviolet light, which are portions of the electromagnetic spectrum, which just so happens to be a specialty of mine. Winter mused. Look, I am not interested in your petty battle. Let me take the Lycan, then kill them all if you wish. It matters not to me. But one way or another, I'm taking the Lycan, with or without your cooperation. Elder and Serana, realizing they were outmatched, not only in terms of power, but in intellect, conceded. Take them then? They are but mongrels anyway. We will deal with the outpost when you are gone, Elder said, his voice laced with resentment, but also resignation. Excellent, said Winter, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. You see, logic over force, he added. With that, Winter simply walked out of Fort Elder as if the meeting had been trivial, treating the Elder beings as mere insects he had agreed not to step on that day. His departure had left a chilling silence in its wake, a testament to the power shift that had just occurred. Winter returned to the outpost with a commanding presence, addressing the Lycan without hesitation. So, prepare to leave immediately, he announced firmly. The Elders have agreed to stop attacking you, so there's no fight for you here. Who are you? Commander Harris interjected, his tone a mix of curiosity and defiance. I am Winter, and I will not waste any more time. I have stopped the destruction of your outpost, Winter replied. In the distance, the undead army was seen marching back towards Fort Elder, a silent testament to his influence. The agreement on my end is fulfilled, Winter added confidently. We did not say we would go with you, Lucan countered, his voice steady but filled with a hint of uncertainty. Winter, his expression hidden behind the chrome mask, paused for a moment, the air heavy with tension. Disappointing, he remarked coolly. If you will not come to him, then he will come to you, he warned. I had hoped logic would have prevailed over your impulses, but I should imagine the parts of your brain are affected by this Lycan curse, particularly your prefrontal cortex. I imagine impulse control and decision-making are difficult for you. With that, Winter turned and left the outpost. His departure left a silence in its wake, as profound and unsettling as the words he had spoken. The sight of the undead army retreating back to Fort Elder brought a temporary relief, but Winter's involvement signaled a change in the dynamics of power and threat. The outpost leaders gathered quickly after Winter's departure, their faces etched with concern and contemplation. Commander Harris, Lucan, and the others knew something significant was about to unfold. The immediate threat of the undead army had been abated, but Winter's words suggested that this respite might be short-lived. Whatever this Winter wants with the Lycan, it's bigger than just our fight here. Lucan mused aloud, his instincts as a leader and protector of his pack coming to the fore. We need to be prepared for whatever comes next, Commander Harris declared, the weight of leadership pressing upon him more than ever. This Winter stopped the undead, but at what cost? And what does he truly want? As the leaders of the outpost deliberated their next steps, the relief of the undead's retreat was tempered by the uncertainty of future challenges. Winter's mention of someone coming to them if they did not follow implied a looming threat that could not be ignored. The outpost had to regroup and strengthen not just their defenses, but also their alliances. The battle might have been halted, but the war was far from over. Sarah was deep in slumber, catching a rare moment of much-needed rest after the relentless stress of the past few days. In her dreams, she was running with the pack, her senses heightened and alive with the familiar thrill of the hunt. But suddenly, everything stopped. The entire pack halted, their attention riveted on a lone figure standing in the distance. It was an ancient, primal being, its call irresistible, pulling at the very core of their beings. As she drew closer in her dream, Sarah could only make out two red eyes burning with a primitive, primal rage. The call was too strong, and in her dream, she found herself unable to resist moving towards it. She awoke with a start, her heart pounding. Almost immediately, other members of the wolf pack burst into the room, each explaining breathlessly that they had experienced the same dream. Lucan, with a grave expression, spoke up. "He's coming. The Alpha. I don't know if we can continue to resist his call if he has grown stronger." Meanwhile, Winter had set up a small camp not far from the outpost, his demeanor one of expectation, as if waiting for someone or something significant to arrive. Back in Fort Elder, Elder and Sarana discussed the recent developments. "He has gone, but he did not take the Lycan. Maybe they refused him," Elder pondered aloud. "And yet, they still live," Sarana added thoughtfully. "This Winter is too powerful and does not seem to take to not get in his way. We need to tread carefully," she advised, her tone laced with caution and a hint of fear. In the deep, frozen woods, the sound of a large creature running on all fours cut through the silence. Deep, heavy breaths echoed between the trees, sending small animals scurrying for cover. Nothing stood in its path as it made its relentless way towards the outpost. Who was this creature? Who was Winter waiting for? And would Elder and Sarana decide to attack the outpost now that Winter had seemingly left the field? Find out in Crimson Dawn Series 2, Episode 5, coming soon. In the deep shadows of the once vibrant den, the alpha cub lay curled up, its tiny form barely disturbing the thick layer of leaves that blanketed the floor. The den, now silent and abandoned, echoed with the ghostly memories of its pack. A primitive sense of loss gnawed at the cub, a painful awareness of the absence of its father, the alpha. Alone, cold, and scared, the cub was the sole heir of a once formidable pack, each member now fallen in the battle against the relentless undead. This young Lycan, despite its tender age, harboured a feral and commanding primal rage inherited from its lineage, a true blood, like and destined for greatness, if it could survive the harsh realities of its new world. After a day of waiting in vain for the return of any pack member, hunger drove the cub from the relative safety of its ancestral den. Its small body trembled with both fear and the biting cold, yet the drive to survive pushed it forward into the unknown. As the alpha cub ventured out into the daunting expanse of the forest, it was overwhelmed by the vastness and the eerie silence, punctuated only by the distant calls of predators and the rustle of leaves underfoot. The loneliness was palpable, each step taking it further away from the only home it had ever known, and deeper into the wilderness. Despite its size and weakness, the cub carried the traits of its alpha heritage. It wasn't long before its keen nose picked up the scent of food, meat, fresh and tantalizingly close. Driven by a mix of hunger and the primal instinct to survive, the cub raced toward the source of the smell. Its heart pounded with both excitement and fear as it neared the promise of sustenance. Suddenly, it saw it, a fresh-cut piece of raw meat just lying on the ground, seemingly unguarded. With no thought other than to quell its gnawing hunger, the cub pounced on the meat, its small teeth sinking into the flesh. But as it did, a net swiftly enveloped it, trapping it within a wire mesh. The shock and betrayal sent the cub into a panic, and it yelped and cried, its cries echoing hauntingly through the forest. From the underbrush, a group of hunters emerged, laughing amongst themselves as they approached their catch. "We got something," one exclaimed with a grin, pulling the net closer to inspect their prize. As they lifted the cub from the ground, their amusement turned to bewilderment. "This little fella won't feed us," one of the hunters remarked, disappointment lacing his words. "Ah well, wrap it up, maybe it will come in use. If not, we can throw it in the lake," he added dismissively. Just as they prepared to bag the cub, one of the hunters paused, his attention caught by something unusual. He turned toward a flicker of light in the distance, a brief glimpse of something shiny, like a mask. "What was that?" "Looked like something shining over there," he muttered, squinting into the dimming light. Then it was gone, as if it had never been there. The moment passed, and the hunters, shaking off the eerie feeling, focused on their captive. Unaware of the true value of the young lichen in their grasp, they continued with their plans, oblivious to the eyes that might still be watching them from the shadows. In a makeshift cage, the young werewolf cub shivered, its small body curled into a tight ball. Just beyond its reach lay a cut of meat, deliberately placed to taunt and tease the hungry creature. As members of the small hunting camp passed by, they kicked the cage, some even throwing rocks and stones at the frightened cub. "It was your kind that started all this," they sneered, echoing the sentiments of blame and anger towards the supernatural beings they held responsible for the chaos in their world. The cub, starving, scared and alone, shook with cold and fear. One man in particular, fueled by a personal vendetta, approached the cage with a venomous glare. "I lost everything because of those werewolves. I'll wring that one's neck," he swore, trying to reach through the bars, only to be held back by others who cautioned restraint. As the shadows lengthened and night fell over the camp, someone moved the meat closer, placing it right at the bars of the cage. The cub, driven by hunger, quickly devoured the meat, its small body trembling as it ate hurriedly. The following morning, two men approached the cage with a cold, calculating look. "So this is it, eh?" one of the men remarked, eyeing the cub with disdain. The other man, smiling cruelly, nodded in agreement. "Well, we don't want it getting any bigger. Tie it up in that bag, put some rocks in there, and drop it in the lake, he suggested with a sinister grin. Better do it tonight when no one's looking, in case someone gets annoyed that they couldn't kill it first, he added. As the two men walked off to prepare for the grim task, the camp suddenly fell into an eerie stillness. Every person froze in place, as if time itself had stopped. Fires still burned, and the wind still blew, but all human activity halted. Then, from the edge of the camp, a figure approached, the man in the chrome mask. He walked up to the cage, placing his hand through the bars without fear of the cub's bite. There, little one. I won't let them hurt you," Winter said soothingly as he opened the cage door. The cub's initial instinct was to attack, but something in its young heart stirred a sense of connection to the man. This was not an enemy or prey. This was pack, a friend, kin. "Come," Winter said gently, and the cub followed him trustingly. As they walked away from the camp, the cub turned back and gave a snarl towards the two men who had planned its grim fate. "Oh, those two wanted you to take swimming lessons, eh?" Winter remarked dryly. With a wave of his gloved hand, the two men suddenly collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Once Winter and the alpha cub were far enough away from the camp, Winter waved his hand again, and the small camp sprang back to life, oblivious to the brief pause in their existence. Winter and the cub continued into the forest, away from the dangers of the camp, embarking on a journey that would define the future of both their destinies. Miles from the perils of the outside world, Winter and the young cub arrived at his laboratory, a place cluttered with pieces of equipment salvaged from numerous research labs. The air was thick with the smell of metal and old electronics. In the center of the room stood a table on which lay the preserved head of a former foe, a necromancer whose demise had not ended his utility to Winter. Winter removed the probes from the head, turning his attention to the cub. "This one was interesting, but you are indeed fascinating," he remarked, his voice filled with a curious mix of admiration and scientific fervor. As he prepared to place probes on the cub, it growled, its primal instincts flaring in defense. However, Winter gestured soothingly, and the cub, sensing his intentions were not harmful, calmed down. It allowed Winter to attach the probes, a connection forming as if the cub recognized Winter as more than just an ally, perhaps even as kin. "Fascinating indeed," Winter murmured, as he began studying the creature more intently. Over the weeks that followed, Winter conducted continuous studies on the cub. His lab was a sanctuary of sorts, where the echoes of their past lives, a necromancer's insights, and a lichened cub's genetic secrets mingled in the quest for understanding. "I'm done," Winter finally declared after extensive research. He looked at the cub, now playfully rolling on the floor, completely at ease in his presence. "I see what you need," he said thoughtfully. "You need to be the alpha," he continued, his voice taking on a serious tone. Winter began to explain the significance of this revelation. If the line of the alpha is extinguished, it would not merely be the end of a bloodline, but could cause a shift in the balance of all supernatural beings. This shift could trigger a cascade of changes, destabilizing the balance of power among all entities, both supernatural and human. He further elaborated that the natural hierarchy among supernatural creatures ensured a balance in their interactions and influence in the world. The Alpha not only leads, but also stabilizes these interactions. Without a true Alpha, the order among your kind and the subsequent interactions with others would falter, potentially leading to chaos. Winter's explanation was grounded in a mixture of scientific understanding and supernatural lore, presenting a compelling case for the importance of maintaining continuity in the leadership of the Lycan. This was not just about power. It was about maintaining the equilibrium necessary to prevent a potential collapse of established supernatural structures. As Winter finished his explanation, the cub listened, its young mind absorbing the gravity of its potential role. Though it could not understand all the nuances, it felt a burgeoning sense of purpose under Winter's tutelage. Winter's laboratory had become a cradle of future possibilities, not just for the cub, but for the balance of power in the world teetering on the edge of unseen thresholds. Over the ensuing months, Winter took on the role of both protector and mentor to the cub, now rapidly maturing into its destined role as the Alpha. He not only ensured its safety, but also nurtured its growth, feeding it and even hunting alongside it in the dense forests that bordered their secluded hideout. As the days passed, Winter found himself as emotionally attached to the cub as it was to him, a bond forged not just of necessity, but of genuine affection and mutual respect. As the cub grew, Winter observed several changes in the werewolf alpha. Its primal drive, rage, and ferocity were evolving. Curious about these developments and eager to test the young alpha's capabilities, Winter decided it was time for a more challenging exercise. One evening, as dusk turned to night, he led the young werewolf back to the small hunter's camp, where it had been trapped many months ago. The site was quiet, the memories of past violence still lingering like ghosts among the trees. "Let's see what you can do," Winter said, quietly, gesturing towards the camp. As the now alpha werewolf entered, its presence alone stirred panic. Screams and cries filled the air briefly, abruptly cut off by a sudden, eerie silence. Winter followed after a few moments, stepping into the camp to find it eerily quiet. "Interesting," he mused aloud, looking around at the stillness that had overtaken the place. "None of these have changed to your kin, my friend. You need a pack. You must become Alpha." More time passed, and the once cub, now almost fully grown, the force of the Alpha's presence was palpable, its primal rage and commanding presence increasingly prominent. Acknowledging the need for the next step, Winter found a deep, dark cave and led the Alpha there. "You must stay here while I search for your kin. There must be some out there," Winter explained, his voice echoing slightly off the cave walls. In a sudden display of affection, and perhaps a test of dominance, the muscular, powerful Alpha dove at Winter, knocking him to the ground before rolling over to expose its stomach, a gesture of both playfulness and submission. No, not now," Winter said, gently pushing the Alpha away. "We can wrestle again when I return. I must find your kin before it's too late. Do not draw attention to yourself. I know you can handle yourself now, but we are not ready." Winter would be gone for days, leaving the Alpha to lay low in the cave, hidden from the outside world and the dangers it held. Then, one day, a familiar whistle cut through the quiet, the signal that Winter was back. "Nothing, I'm afraid, my friend," Winter reported upon his return, his face drawn with the fatigue of fruitless searching. "But we must not give up. You will be Alpha once more." As they settled back into the cave, the weight of their task lay heavily on them both, a reminder of the challenges they faced in restoring the Alpha to its rightful place and securing the future of its lineage. As evening fell, Winter's familiar whistle echoed through the cave, signaling a new challenge. "Come, I have a test for you," he called to the Alpha, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He led the growing werewolf to a small clearing nearby, where about 100 undead had wandered into the area, an inadvertent intrusion into their secluded world. "Show me what you can do against these," Winter instructed, standing back as he gestured towards the undead horde. The Alpha, now fully embracing its emerging status, initially did not comply. It was developing into a true alpha, one that would not be commanded by anyone, not even by Winter, who had been its protector and mentor. This defiance was exactly what Winter had hoped to see. "Excellent," Winter said with a nod, a hint of pride in his voice. "You are getting stronger. Then simply take out your rage on these things, if you care to, my alpha," Winter challenged, emphasizing ownership and the unique bond they shared. With that, the alpha unleashed its fury. It surged forward with a burst of energy that seemed to come from the very earth itself. The undead, mindless and slow, stood no chance as the alpha tore into them. In mere moments, the clearing was a scene of carnage, with the alpha dispatching each undead with a brutal efficiency that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Winter watched on, his expression hidden behind his mask, as the primal rage took over the alpha, transforming it into a force of nature that could not be stopped. The raw power and ferocity displayed were exactly what he had hoped to cultivate in the young werewolf. Back in the cave, Winter sat near a small fire as the alpha paced back and forth. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the metallic tang of blood. "Yes, I feel it too, old friend," Winter spoke softly, almost reflectively. "The time is coming when we can no longer be friends, but I will find your kin. This I promise, sir." In that moment, the alpha issued a commanding snarl at Winter, a primitive order that resonated deep within both of them. It was a challenge, a demand for respect and recognition of its power. The alpha raised up, its primal energy overwhelming, filling the space between them with a palpable tension. "Yes, I knew this day would come. To be alpha, you need to be the boss, right?" Winter acknowledged, his voice calm and even. For the first time, Winter removed his mask, allowing the alpha to see his face, a gesture of trust and respect. The alpha, sensing the significance of the moment, lowered its posture and walked up to Winter, then sat at his feet like a dog curling up with its owner, recognizing the bond they still shared. Winter replaced his mask, his movements deliberate. This moment had sealed their bond anew, not just as creator and creature, but as allies in a world that was constantly changing around them. Perched on a cold, wind-swept hill, Winter sat alone, gazing into the vast landscape stretched out before him. His eyes, keen and observant, scanned the horizon, while his hands busied themselves with marking segments on a map spread across his lap. "I know you're out there, and I will find you," he murmured to the chill air, his breath visible in the frosty morning. Suddenly, his sharp gaze caught a small anomaly in the usual emptiness of the landscape. A white car, rolling along the distant road. It came to a stop, and 3 figures disembarked. They started walking in a direction away from one of Winter's strategically placed safe houses. Watching them, Winter tapped into his unique abilities, connecting with the electromagnetic waves of brain waves. With a subtle manipulation, he influenced their thoughts. Suddenly, one of the trio suggested changing course, pointing in the direction of the safe house. "So easily controlled," Winter muttered with a hint of disdain, yet a flicker of satisfaction. He waited patiently as the trio entered the safe house, then approached. Standing at the front path, he announced, "It's okay. I know you're there, and you're only there because I allow it." The surprise and confusion on their faces were evident as they met him. After a brief conversation, during which the trio divulged the location of an outpost where Lycan lived, Winter felt a surge of urgency. He thanked them and left swiftly, making his way back to the cave. Upon arrival, he whistled before entering, signaling his presence to the Alpha, who awaited him with anticipation. "Good news, my friend. We have found your kin. You shall be Alpha again," Winter announced, He pointed in the direction of the outpost. "Meet me there. I'll go first to ensure it's safe," he instructed, noting the Alpha's eager growl of affirmation. "Yes, I know you want to rush in, but this will be the last thing I can do for you," he added, his voice heavy with a mixture of resignation and finality. They shared a moment of silent communication, a deep understanding passing between them. Winter was logical, calculating, and possessed an intelligence that sometimes seemed too advanced for his era, yet he felt a twinge of emotion, a rarity for him, as he contemplated this potentially being the last time he saw the Alpha, not just as a project, but as kin. Fueling the small Honda Fit, Winter set out towards the outpost. As he drove, he examined the new emotions stirring within him. "Interesting," he mused aloud. "I always wondered what that would feel like." His voice carried a hint of both wonder and melancholy. Back in the cave, the Alpha paced, the weight unbearable. It could feel the primal rage building within, the pull towards its kin, and the overwhelming drive to assert itself as the true Alpha. Every fibre of its being vibrated with the need to fulfill its destiny, to lead, to dominate, to become what it was born to be. The stage was set for a reunion that would shift the balances of power, for a confrontation that might define the future of the Lycan, and perhaps all those connected to them. The Alpha waited, bound by Winter's command, yet ready to explode into action. At the first sign, it was time to move. The Alpha could no longer contain its burgeoning primal urge. It was overwhelmed by the visceral connection to its kin. Without a second thought, it bolted from the cave, its paws pounding against the earth as it raced towards the direction Winter had indicated. The landscape shifted from lush green grass to snow-covered lands, a stark reminder of the changing world around it. But the Alpha's focus remained unyielded. With each stride, its primal rage swelled, driven by nature's call. As it surged through the icy woods, an innate sense of its kin strengthened. The Alpha felt a strange, compelling connection to these unknown Lycan. It could sense 8 werewolves. Somehow, it knew them intimately. It felt their emotions, their fears, and the bonds they shared, even though they had never met. The Alpha's journey became more than a physical run. It was a spiritual homecoming. Nature itself seemed to acknowledge the Alpha's formidable presence. Animals scurried away, and the very trees seemed to bend, clearing a path. "Run, hide, the Alpha is coming," the forest whispered in a chorus of rustling leaves and cracking branches. Days passed, and the Alpha's supernatural speed saw no match. It was an unstoppable force, propelled by the inexorable pull of the pack. Suddenly, amidst the blur of its journey, the Alpha looked up to see a familiar chrome face. Winter was there, camped on a small hill overlooking the path. For a moment, the Alpha's heart leapt. It wanted to run to him, to join its mentor, its father figure. But Winter pointed towards the camp, his head shaking subtly. The time for bonds was past. It was now time for the Alpha to fulfill its destiny. With a heavy heart, but an undeterred spirit, the Alpha ran past Winter, its gaze set firmly on the outpost. Standing alone on his hill, Winter was seen removing his mask and wiping something from his face, a rare show of emotion for someone so usually detached. He then turned and walked back towards his laboratory. His role as the guide was complete. It was time for the Alpha to reconnect with its pack and assume its rightful place as their leader. The Alpha approached the outpost with a mix of anticipation and readiness. The outpost lay ahead, visible now, a beacon pulling it forward. This was more than a return. It was a claim to its heritage and a step-in into the role it was born to fill. As the Alpha neared the outpost, its heart pounded, not just with exertion, but with the imminent meeting of its family. It was ready to lead, to protect, and to thrive as the true Alpha. The wilderness whispered of its return, and the moonlight cast a path, leading it home. The time had come for the Alpha to take its place at the head of the pack, to be Alpha once more. As the landscape blurs past the swiftly moving form of the Alpha, the air thick with the crisp scent of pine and impending snow, the tension across the land escalates. The outpost, a fragile bastion of humanity and lichen kinship, braces for what may come. Will the arrival of the true Alpha bring salvation or further chaos? Elder and Serana, with their dark machinations, have not been idle. Their plans to obliterate any resistance are nearing fruition, and the outpost might be their first casualty. With the undead forces still at their command, despite Winter's intervention, the question remains, will the Alpha arrive in time to thwart their sinister plans? Meanwhile, Winter, the enigmatic guardian of the Alpha, returns to his laboratory, his mind burdened with the weight of his actions and decisions. His attachment to the Alpha was unexpected, and now, with their paths diverging, he must reassess his role in this intricate tapestry of power. What moves will he make from the shadows to ensure the Alpha's success? As the Alpha races against time and destiny, its primal heart knows only the pull of its pack and the burning need to protect and lead, but the journey is fraught with peril and the outcome uncertain. The Alpha's arrival at the outpost is imminent, yet so many factors remain in flux. Will the Alpha find its pack in time to save them? Or will Elder and Serana's dark forces prevail? How will the dynamics shift when these powerful beings finally converge at the outpost? Prepare for a tale of epic proportions in Crimson Dawn Series 2, Part 6, where the fate of the Alpha, the survival of the outpost, and the shadows cast by Winter's past actions will collide in a story of power, loyalty, and the eternal struggle for balance. Stay tuned as the saga continues to unfold, where every heartbeat and every growl writes the history of their world. The siege of the outpost. As dawn broke over the horizon, a sense of impending doom hung heavily over the outpost. The first rays of sunlight, usually a symbol of hope, today seemed to herald the advance of a dark tide. Lucan, Captain Harris, and Commander Lewis, alongside all members of the Wolfpack, were tensely preparing for the assault they knew was coming. A massive invasion, led by Eldur's undead army. The outpost had been fortified to the best of their abilities, but as the distant rumble of thousands of undead feet marching in unison became audible, even the bravest hearts among them felt a chill. Eldur's undead army, a seemingly unstoppable force, advanced with the precision of a well-oiled machine. At the forefront were the undead warriors, Eldur's elite, each one trained to fight with ruthless efficiency. As the horde approached, the defenders of the outpost took their positions. Lucan roared orders, trying to bolster the morale of the Lycan fighters who stood ready to protect their home and their human allies. Captain Harris and Commander Lewis coordinated the human defences, their faces set in grim determination. The first wave of the undead crashed against the outpost's defences like a tidal wave against the cliffs. The sounds of battle roared through the air, metal clashing, snarls, and the cries of the fallen. Despite their valiant efforts and strategic planning, the outpost's defenders quickly realized they were outmatched. The undead warriors, skilled and numerous, tore through the barricades with horrifying ease. The wolfpack fought with a primal ferocity, their teeth and claws stained with the decay of their foes, but even their supernatural strength was not enough. One by one they fell, overwhelmed by the sheer numbers and the relentless assault of the undead. Lucan, his fur matted with blood, fought desperately at the front lines, his heart sinking as he saw his packmates overwhelmed. Inside the command centre, Captain Harris and Commander Lewis watched in horror through the surveillance monitors. The images before them spoke of a battle turning into a massacre. The outpost, so full of life and hope just hours before, was now on the verge of a complete destruction. From a vantage point, Eldur and Sarana watched the destruction unfold with gleeful smiles. Their faces, illuminated by the fires of the burning outpost, the success of their undead warriors filled them with a dark joy. Each scream of despair from the outpost, a note in their symphony of destruction. The outpost, once a bustling haven of cooperation and resistance, was now being torn apart. Buildings that had stood as symbols of human and Lycan resilience were now ablaze or crumbling under the onslaught. The defenders, despite their bravery and determination, were being pushed back, their lines breaking under the ceaseless waves of undead. This chapter in the story of the outpost was one of desperation and helplessness, a stark display of the raw power Eldur wielded, and a grim reminder of the potential fate of all those who stood against him. The survivors, those few who still stood, were forced to retreat further into the heart of the outpost, their eyes haunted by the loss of their comrades and the potential end of their cause. As the outpost defences crumbled under the relentless assault, every remaining person, hardened by desperation, grasped any weapon they could find. The air was thick with despair and the stench of defeat. Among the defenders, the feeling of hopelessness was palpable as they watched their friends and fellow fighters fall one by one to the unstoppable undead horde. The remaining Lycan, bloodied and beaten, lay scattered across the outpost, their strength dwindling. Lucan, grievously injured but still resolute, retreated with Captain Harris to the last safe point within the outpost. "We make our last stand here," Captain Harris declared, his voice rough with fatigue and determination. "Even in the face of overwhelming odds, we must fight. We must not give in. Until our last breath, we must believe. We must have hope," he implored, trying to ignite a flicker of resolve in the eyes of those who remained. His words were meant to inspire, but the wave of undead advancing towards them seemed like an insurmountable tide, drowning out all but the faintest hope. The outpost members, surrounded by the ruins of what they had once called a sanctuary, felt a deep, crushing despair. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and seemingly destined for defeat. Their hands tightened around their weapons, their hearts heavy with the imminent end. At that critical moment, the Alpha reached the outskirts of the outpost. From afar, It could see and feel the plight of its kin on the brink of annihilation. These Lycan were strong, but they were not of true blood, not like the Alpha. With a powerful leap, the Alpha threw itself into the path of the oncoming undead warriors. The wounded Lycan, near death and defeated, lay scattered and broken. Yet, as the Alpha roared, a sound so primal and powerful that it seemed to emanate from the very core of nature itself, they sensed something transformative. This roar wasn't just heard, it was felt, vibrating through every soul, every essence and life force present. It was a call to arms, a revival, a primal summons that no true Lycan could ignore. Suddenly, an incredible phenomenon occurred. The fallen Lycan began to stand, invigorated by a newfound strength, more primal and powerful than ever before. Even Lucan, shifting from his broken and wounded human form, screamed as he transformed. "For the Alpha!" he roared, his voice echoing the newfound resolve. A mystical connection formed among them, binding them to the Alpha. Their eyes blazed with primal rage, a mirror of the Alpha's own ferocity. As they rose, they tore through the undead army with renewed vigor and unrelenting force. Nothing seemed to stand in their way anymore. The Alpha entered the fray, its raw power unmatched by any force the undead could muster. With the Alpha leading them, the Lycan cleared the battlefield, each undead warrior falling one after another under their relentless assault. This unexpected resurgence changed the tide of battle. What seemed like an imminent defeat turned into a spectacular stand, a testament to the unyielding spirit and primal power of the Lycan under the true Alpha's lead. The battlefield, once a scene of despair, became a ground of triumphant resurgence as they reclaimed their home from the clutches of darkness. Perched from their hidden vantage point, Eldur and Serana watched the unfolding carnage with growing dread. The darkened shelter shielded them from the daylight, but not from the seismic shift occurring on the battlefield below. As the Alpha's presence became undeniable, a true blood Lycan radiating primal power, Eldur's face contorted in disbelief. "This can't be," he muttered, his voice a mixture of fear and astonishment. Serana, feeling the palpable shift in power, began to retreat into the shadows, her voice trembling. "A true blood will spell our doom. We should not have meddled with the undead," she warned, her eyes wide with fear. "The balance was disrupted. We shall now surely pay." "No," Eldur snapped, his voice hardened with resolve but edged with desperation. "The humans must pay. They forced me to suffer for years. They must pay," he insisted, refusing to accept the inevitable. Peering out once more, they saw the undeniable truth. Their undead army was being decimated. Serana, her confidence shattered, slowly backed away and vanished into the shadows, leaving Eldur to face the consequences alone. "Coward," he shouted after her, his voice echoing hollowly in the empty space. On the battlefield, the Alpha stood tall among the fallen undead, its breathing deep and rhythmic, filled with the scent of victory and the lingering stench of decay. It sensed the root of this conflict. Eldur. With a slight motion of its head towards Fort Eldur, it signaled the pack, and like a wave, they surged forward, unstoppable. Reaching Fort Eldur, the Alpha and its pack encountered little resistance. The few remaining undead guards fell swiftly, like leaves in a storm. The Alpha, now surrounded by its newly formed pack, roared triumphantly, a sound that shook the very foundations of the fort. Emerging from the shadows, but still clinging to them, Eldur appeared, his figure a mix of defiance and despair. Faced with this unstoppable primal force, he found himself helpless, his usual cunning and control stripped away, as he begged for his life, pleading, "I only did what I had to survive." His voice was tinged with a pathetic desperation. As the Alpha prepared to strike the final blow, a commanding voice filled the air, echoing around the ruins of the fort. "No," it thundered. "You must not disrupt the balance." This voice was more felt than heard, its authority undeniable. It was Lysander, the ancient Lycan god, whose will was as much a part of the land as the rocks and trees. The Alpha, recognizing the command, hesitated, and then, with a final look of disdain towards Elder, turned to leave. Elder, defeated and alone, received a commanding look from the Alpha, a silent order to abandon this place forever. Taking the only option left to him, Elder vanished into the shadows. His reign of terror ended as abruptly as it had begun. As the Alpha led its pack away from Fort Elder, a new era dawned for the Lycan and their allies. The balance had been restored, but at what cost? The battlefield lay quiet, a stark reminder of the brutal clash for survival. The world of the supernatural had been forever altered, and the consequences of these changes were yet to be fully understood. Outside the outpost, the Lycan pack, now fully under the Alpha's command, stood formidable and united. The remaining inhabitants of the outpost were busily clearing the aftermath of the battle, tending to the wounded and mourning the dead. Despite the destruction, there was a palpable sense of relief that the siege was over and they had survived, albeit barely. Captain Harris, bloodied and weary yet wearing a grateful smile, ran towards the pack, his arms open in thanks. "You did it!" he shouted joyously, but before he could get close, the remaining members of the wolf pack leapt in front of him, forming a protective barrier around the Alpha. They stood their ground, growling defensively at anyone who dared approach their leader. The captain stopped abruptly, shock registering on his face as he realized the change in the wolf pack. They were no longer just the allies he had known and fought alongside. They had transformed into true pack members, bound by a deeper, more primal loyalty to the Alpha. At that moment, Captain Harris wasn't sure if they were about to be slaughtered by the very saviors of the outpost. Lucan, now back in his human form, stepped forward to speak with Captain Harris, his expression somber. "We were never our true selves without the Alpha," Lucan explained. "The Alpha has unleashed our primal rage, our true nature. We will leave now. We follow the Alpha." Lucan continued, his voice firm yet filled with a hint of regret. "The Alpha will not take this place. Not because of us. We have asked him to spare this place at great risk to ourselves. Should you see the Alpha again, it will be the last thing you see." With those final words, the Alpha began to walk away, the power of its presence almost palpable in the air. The Wolfpack followed without hesitation, their steps resolute. They left the outpost and the survivors behind, disappearing into the wilderness that had called them back to their roots. As the figures of the pack faded into the distance, the survivors of the outpost stood in silence, watching them go. The departure of the Lycan pack marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter for those left at the outpost. They were alone now, left to rebuild and fortify their home, knowing the world outside had changed irreversibly. The threat of the undead had been quelled, but the outpost was now starkly aware of the powerful forces at play in the world beyond their walls. The balance had shifted, and they could only wonder what the future would hold. As the dust settled and the last echoes of the departing Lycan pack faded into the distance, the survivors of the outpost faced the arduous task of returning to what was once Fort Haven. The fortress, a symbol of their resilience and unity, lay in partial ruin, a stark reminder of the recent siege and the relentless battles fought within and around its walls. The return was sombre, yet determined. The survivors, led by Captain Harris and Commander Lewis, walked through the gates of Fort Haven, their eyes taking in the extent of the damage. The walls that had once stood proud and defiant were now marred by the scars of war, crumbled in parts, blackened by fire in others. "We will rebuild," Captain Harris declared as they gathered in the heart of the fort, amidst the rubble and remnants of their defences. The group around him, weary yet unbroken in spirit, nodded in agreement. Commander Lewis stepped forward, spreading out a set of blueprints on a makeshift table made from debris. "We need to rebuild, yes, but more importantly, we need to rethink our defences based on what we've learned," he said, pointing to the plans that now included new fortifications and traps designed specifically to counter undead assaults and deter any supernatural entities. "There are others out there," added a new voice, one of the younger leaders who had risen during the recent conflicts. "Other survivors, other enclaves. We need to find them, bring them here, or establish new outposts. We are stronger together, and our combined knowledge could make us a formidable force against any supernatural threats." The discussions moved swiftly from recovery to proactive strategies. The world had indeed changed, and with it, the nature of their existence had to evolve. They couldn't merely survive, they needed to thrive, to grow in power and understanding. The spectre of supernatural entities, undead, vampires, and werewolves, loomed large, a constant threat that could re-emerge at any time. "We must grow in power, power enough to defeat the supernatural should they return," Captain Harris said firmly, his gaze steady as he surveyed the group. "This isn't just about rebuilding walls, it's about fortifying our very existence." As the meeting concluded, the survivors dispersed to begin the work. Teams were formed, each with specific tasks, some to clear debris and repair damages, others to scout the surrounding areas for resources or potential allies. The air was filled with the sounds of construction, the clinking of metal, the sawing of wood, and the determined voices of people who had faced the darkness and lived to tell the tale. Fort Haven was coming back to life, slowly but surely. It was transforming not just in its physical form, but also in its purpose and resolve. As the sun set over the newly bustling fort, it cast long shadows and a glow of hope, a symbol that life at Fort Haven would not only continue, but would rise stronger and more prepared than ever before. Elder moved stealthily from shadow to shadow, the hunted becoming the hunter once more, though now he was merely a fugitive from powers he could neither match nor understand. "Elders, we are nothing more than insects," he murmured bitterly as he wandered through the desolate landscape. "The world has changed, but we have become the lowest on the scale, even lower than the humans." Finding solace in an abandoned old building that seemed to have once served as a storage unit for wood, Elder settled in. It was a place to rest, to reflect on the ruins of his ambitions and the fall of his kind. The sage Varric and the elders, all gone. What good are elders who cannot even defeat the humans? He lamented, his voice echoing in the hollow space. "We were supposed to be the most powerful. What are we now? A handful of parasites running from humans and lichen." As he continued to brood over his fate and the apparent end of the Elder's era, he felt a profound sense of defeat. Maybe the time for elders is over. Maybe my time is over. The Lycan are too strong, the undead too vast, the humans too resourceful, and we, the elders, once the proudest, most ancient and powerful of them all, are now nothing. This world is nothing. Just then, a noise like thunder shattered the silence, followed by a sensation of immense power breaking into the world from another realm. Elder, startled, looked up to see a powerful vision materialize before him, an imposing figure exuding regality and ancient strength. It was the Elder God, the vampire deity, whom Elder recognized with awe and fear. This god's appearance was regal, powerful, immortal. The reason you failed, Elder, is because you played with the power of another. The god spoke, his voice resonant and commanding. The undead deity, he continued, giving a name to the force Elder had recklessly tampered with. We do not need to borrow power from another. We are elders. Elder, feeling both chastened and desperate, questioned his god. What power do we have? What power have you given us? We cannot even defeat the Lycan. The Lycan were born to limit the spread of the elders in the days of the humans, the vampire god explained. While the humans once again rebuild their kind and begin to populate this world, the Lycan are few. You, Elder, will spread the power of the elders. All this while, you never used your greatest power, the power to create new elders, transform the humans, their numbers grow. Do it while the Lycan are still small in number. With those final words, the vision faded, leaving Elder alone once again. But now, a new plan was forming in his mind, a spark of ambition reignited. Could he be the true savior of the elders? Was he destined to be the new sage, the one to restore the elders to their former glory? As the realization settled, Elder felt a surge of purpose. This was not the end, but perhaps a new beginning. He stood up, his resolve hardened, ready to embrace this daunting task. If the elders were to rise again, it would be by his hand, and through the power he had neglected, the power to create, to transform, to dominate. Elder, now fully embracing his ancient heritage and newly awakened purpose, hid in the shadows of the farm, a place he had covertly turned into his sanctuary and hunting ground. This was no ordinary farm. Unbeknownst to its human inhabitants, it had become a feeding ground for a vampire. Night after night, Elder moved like a ghost among them, drawing sustenance with such subtlety that his presence went unnoticed. The humans, attributing their constant sickness and weakness to the hardships of their new world, were unaware of the predator in their midst. Tonight, however, Elder's actions would shift from parasitic survival to a deliberate act of creation. He watched from the darkness as one of the farm's inhabitants, a man named Thomas, prepared for bed. Thomas, like the others, had no idea of the true cause of his nightly fatigue. Once Thomas had settled into bed and fallen into a deep sleep, Elder silently emerged from the shadow. With a predator's precision, Elder approached the bedside. He paused, observing Thomas's unsuspecting face, then leaned down and began to feed. Unlike his usual careful sips, this time he drained Thomas completely, absorbing the very essence of his life until there was nothing left. Once Thomas lay pale and still, Elder took a sharp object and made a small cut on his own finger. He allowed his dark, potent blood to drip into Thomas's mouth, an act that was both ritualistic and deliberate. He whispered ancient words under his breath, words that carried the weight of centuries of power and darkness. After some time, as the moon cast its pale light through the window, Thomas's eyes suddenly snapped open. They shone with an unnatural light, The first sign of his transformation, Eldur, standing over him with a mix of paternal pride and dark anticipation, welcomed him to his new existence. "Welcome, brother," Eldur said softly, his voice carrying an assurance of their shared destiny. "We are the first of a new beginning." Thomas sat up, confusion and realization crossing his features as he touched his throat, feeling the lingering pain of Eldur's bite. His life as a human was over, but his existence as something far more powerful had just begun. Outside, the night air was still, as if nature itself was holding its breath, watching the birth of this new dark force. Eldur knew that the process he had started this night would not be isolated. It was the first step in a larger plan, a strategy to rebuild the ranks of the Elders and restore their dominance in a world that had nearly forgotten them. As he guided Thomas, now his progeny, through the first hours of his new life, Eldur felt a renewed sense of purpose. The world had indeed changed, but he was determined to ensure that the Elders would not only adapt, but also rise to reign once again. This farm was just the beginning. Eldur, feeling invigorated by his newfound direction, employed his shadow influence to search the dark corners of the world for Serana. "Serana, are you there? I know you can hear me," he called out into the void, his voice a resonant thread woven into the fabric of the shadows. "Things have changed. We can win again," he declared, his tone infused with a renewed sense of purpose and certainty. After a moment of silence that stretched through the shadows, Serana materialized. Her emergence from the darkness was cautious, her expression one of wary suspicion. "If this is some type of trick to get revenge, Elder, it will not work," she stated firmly, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of deceit. What she saw, however, left her momentarily speechless. Standing around Elder were 5 new Elders, recently transformed, their eyes glowing with the nascent power of their vampiric heritage. "What is this?" Serana asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. Elder looked around at his newly created kin, his expression one of pride and determination. He then turned his gaze back to Serana, ready to unveil his vision. "This," he began, his voice rising with the fervor of his beliefs, "is the rebirth of our kind. For too long, we Elders have skulked in the shadows, scavenging scraps of power, fearing the world and its changes. We have used the powers of others, relied on manipulations and deceptions, when all the while we held the greatest power within ourselves." He stepped forward, his aura of leadership more pronounced than ever. "Our rightful place is not at the fringes of this world, Serana. It is at the very top, as the dominant species. We are the night's true rulers, and it's time we reclaimed that birthright." Eldur's voice grew more passionate as he continued. "We have been held back, trapped by old fears and old wars, but now..." He paused, his gaze sweeping over his new creations before settling on Serana. "I will set us all free. No longer will we be shadows, fearing the light. We will be the darkness that swallows it." Serana, looking at the conviction in Eldur's eyes and the unmistakable power radiating from the new Elders, felt a stirring of something long dormant within her, a spark of ambition and a reminder of their true nature. Eldur's words resonated with a part of her that she had suppressed in the face of recent defeats. "Is this truly possible?" she asked, the skepticism in her voice now tinged with a curious hope. "Yes," Eldur affirmed, stepping closer to her. "With these new Elders, and many more to come, we will build an army not of undead pawns, but of true Elders. We will not hide from the world. We will rule it." As the night wind whispered through the trees around them, a new chapter for the Elders began to unfold, one that promised power, domination, and a return to the glory of their darkest days. Elder and Serana, united by a common vision, looked out into the night, ready to forge their path of resurgence, no longer as survivors, but as sovereigns. As the dusk settled into the deep blue of night, the landscape of the supernatural and human world was quietly shifting. The Alpha and its revitalized wolf pack, now embracing their primal essence, roamed the wilderness. Their newfound power and wild nature posed a stirring question. What threats might they bring to a world still reeling from chaos? Their fierce independence and raw strength made them unpredictable, a wild card in the ever-evolving game of power. Elsewhere, the undead, though momentarily quelled, remained a lurking danger. Not all had fallen to the might of the Wolfpack, and their numbers, while reduced, still whispered of the potential for resurgence. These creatures of decay, under no one's control, could once again rise to form a menacing army of the night. Meanwhile, Eldor's actions had set a new narrative in motion for the Elders. As they grew in number and strength, their ambition to dominate the night and reclaim their ancient supremacy posed a formidable threat. With Eldor and Serana at the helm, the Elders were no longer mere shadows of the past. They were a growing force, driven by a vision to rule over all. The humans, ever resilient, continued to rebuild amidst these supernatural tumults. Their communities, strengthened by adversity, were expanding, their defenses bolstered by the knowledge of the threats that prowled in the darkness. Yet, as they grew in number and fortitude, the question remained: would they be ready to face a world where the night was alive, with more than just shadows? And then there was Winter, the mysterious figure who had orchestrated the rise of the Alpha. His motivations remained as obscured as his actions. Was his manipulation of the Alpha merely a move in a larger, more sinister plan? Or was there a deeper purpose to his interventions, one that might yet reveal a new threat or an unexpected ally? As the curtain falls on this chapter of the Crimson Dawn, these questions hang in the air, heavy with the promise of answers and the inevitability of confrontation. The supernatural entities, each with their agendas and ancient powers, are set to collide in a struggle that could reshape the boundaries between night and day, human and supernatural. Stay tuned for Crimson Dawn, Episode 7, coming soon, where the fates of the Alpha, the Elders, the undead, and the humans will converge in a tale of power, betrayal, and survival in the shadow of the ever-watchful night.